if you go to a testing center and you test positive, you're required, I think, to download some form of app that makes you keep in contact with health authorities, and they remind you not to leave the house, etc. They do warn you you're not allowed to leave your self-isolation period for 2 weeks. It's very different when you're already living in the country as to when you're coming in from abroad. I think the quarantine measures, the draconian, some might say, measures that have been put in place have normally, until now, been reserved for people who are coming in from foreign countries.
And just one final point on this, are the measures popular?
A lot of people have been saying how, South Korea is such a draconian thing to be using, because the authorities do have the right to contact telephone companies. So the 3 major telephone companies that give data based on what cell towers have been telling you about which phone numbers were in a certain area at a given time. They also have access to credit card data. That said, it's not because they have that data that I think police are going to come knocking on your door. For now, for this second major outbreak, the authorities are encouraging people to come forward themselves to get themselves tested. It's not as draconian, some might argue, as to say having to have permission slips to leave your own house, as it was the case in France. It's the question of what you value more, your privacy with authorities or your right to move outside.
So, Anne-Sophie, Simpere, pick your druthers. Would you prefer the French system, where you have to have a piece of paper when you go out the door during a lockdown period, or the South Korean system with this intensive tracking?
We're not going to compare it that way at Amnesty International, but we have very serious concerns about different measures that are put in place. And when I hear you talking about an app that would be compulsory, for us it's extremely worrying, because, I mean, an app, as soon as an entity can monitor where you're going, who you're interacting with, what are your communication, that's surveillance. So if it's compulsory, then we go into mass surveillance, and that will be against international law. And for us, it's very much of a problem, because organizations like us cannot afford to, I mean, we need to investigate certain cases of human rights violation. We need some secrecy, we need privacy. We cannot have the government interfering with who we meet. And that's also the case for journalists, investigative journalists, and that's the case for anyone. So this kind of intrusion will be disproportionate and affect freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. So
what about the promises of a system that uses Bluetooth, that would not store your personal data? Some have talked about that.
I mean, in terms of human rights, it's possible, because the objective, I mean, the right to health is a human right. So you can undermine some other freedoms for the sake of the right to health. Yet it has to be absolutely necessary and proportionate. And we have doubts about the app using Bluetooth. And Bluetooth is not a technology meant to detect a situation of contamination. It's not precise. It can detect another phone through a wall. It's not precise in terms of distance. It has to run all the time. I mean, technically also it will exclude groups such as younger children under 10 because they don't have a phone, or the elderly because they don't have a phone or a modern enough phone. You have to have battery all the time. You have to have a network all the time. And all the people that are asymptomatic will be out of the blue. So we have a lot of doubt about the balance between the potential efficiency and the risks for human rights.